Now we're going to look at the functional pelvis, because we're trying to find functional solutions for lots of things. So I'm going to put little Mr. Man here on the side for a minute. But here's our sacrum, our sacred bone. And what we're going to look at this sacrum, and as we look here, we want to see the different planes that the actual pelvis moves in. So this is our middle bone, but we've got our two large bones on the side, the ilia, that are on either side. Those are like the big ears, like big elephant ears. And the way I like to explain it is that you have a Cocker Spaniel with his big flat forehead in the middle and two ears on the side. And you know, Cocker Spaniel can be very expressive. And so he can have his ears moving side to side, up and down in rotation. They can rotate forward and back, and they can shift up and down. That's the way that the bones of the pelvis move as well. Well, as those bones are moving on the side, well, guess what? The sacrum is making a dance also in the inside of that. So the sacrum has an L-shaped joint here, and so that's what the actual sacroiliac joint is. It's an L-shaped joint. And what it's doing is that it's moving from one side to the other, and it's actually making like a figure 8 kind of motion. So you see, if I put my fingers on what's called the upper pole and the lower pole, and I put those there, it actually is gyrating around with every step that we take and moves with us with the different positions that we're in. So the Cocker Spaniel's flat forehead is really not so flat. It really is moving around in the middle of those ears. So not only do the ears move on the side, the forehead is also moving in relation to those ears. That's what's happening with our pelvis, the functional pelvis. So let's define some planes now. So if I'm working on my functional pelvis, and we could do this for any part of the body, if I feel a pole, a vertical pole is going straight down through me, that's my y-axis. And so my pelvis can move front and back in the transverse plane in that y-axis. And that's what we need to make steps and to make progression, because you have to step forward and step forward. So it's absolutely essential in the y-axis that it moves back and forth, and then it also creates twisting in the spine, counter-twisting. There's a man named Grakovetsky that has written a whole book on something called the spinal engine that drives the legs for walking. The next plane could be the Z-plane. So if it's like some kind of a spear or something that impales me to the front, and that makes my pelvis shift from side to side. So this is, and I'm saying side to side, but not this way. It's trying to go up and down, but as it's going up and down from one side to the other, there is going to be a shift of weight that happens as it goes back and forth. So that's the Z axis. In that plane is the coronal plane. Then the next plane we have is the x-axis, the first one. Usually I should have said x, y, and z, but we started from back and now we're going back to x. X is the one that's horizontal this way. So this is the one where it's really right in the middle, and it works on flexion and extension. So the sacrum is doing flexion. The whole pelvis can do flexion and extension. The hemipelvis can do flexion and extension. And so can the actual sacrum do flexion and extension. And in the sacrum, it's called nutation when it tips forward, and then counter-nutation when it flips back, as in posteriorly rotated pelvis, the general form of that. Well, not getting too complicated now, just to say that in the x-plane, in the x-axis, is that defines flexion and extension. So just to review, the x-axis, horizontal, that does flexion and extension. The y-axis, vertical, starting from my head to my tail, that's the y-axis defines rotation. And then the z-axis goes from the front, impales me to the back, and then that's something that works on side bending. So now, and then the flexion axis I meant to mention is that works with the sagittal plane. So from there then, we can look at how we could walk. Let's practice walking and sitting. So as we're walking and sitting, I can have one side of my pelvis moving forward and then one side moving backwards. So you see, so it can go one step, and that brings my knee forward. I progress, and then that one comes back, and then I go to the other side, and that brings the other knee forward, and then pulls back to step. So it's going through an anterior rotation on one side, a relative posterior rotation with the ilium on the other side, and then it's going to exchange. Then the sacrum's doing like a figure 8 in the middle. Oh my gosh, how can that be? So if I go forward, step forward, step forward. Now think of that you're making a figure 8 from the back. So you see, if I move around this way, I can see that from here, as I'm moving forward and back, that this is now making like a figure 8 in this very middle part, right here in this triangle part of the sacrum. So I can go forward and forward. But just to practice, I can take the pelvis and tip it forward, tip it back. Just practicing one at a time, forward, back and down. Forward, back and down. So changing from anterior to posterior rotation on this ilium. If I go to the other side, and you don't have to do this on your satellite box, I can go on this side now, and I can practice forward, back and down. And if I practice on each hemipelvis, I can help to get the motion through that the best. And this is best done for someone who's not having real problems with their sacrum, right? You have to have somebody that has a stable sacral area, sacroiliac area to begin with. And then I can come back and then put them together, you see, so they're moving oppositionally, forward, back and down. Each one of them, forward, back and down. So you see, so little Mr. Man, as he's here and he's on his actual sitting on one side, you can see on this one that again, as his leg comes back and down, it goes into anterior rotation, but then the other side that's sitting is in relative posterior rotation. So it's going back and forth that way as we're walking. And then this sacrum is going to be doing this nice little dance from the back. And if I show it to you this way, so it actually has the tail there, and it's changing from one side to the other, the osteokinematic motion, that it's almost hanging in the breeze. I've heard it related that way by osteopaths before, as the actual ilia are doing the driving force from the legs. And that's our functional pelvis.